The night the storm came down from the north, it felt less like weather and more like judgment. Wind tore through the trees like it was hunting something, rattling the loose metal of road signs and howling against the thin steel frame of Sarah Mitchell's aging sedan. She sat rigid in the driver's seat, fingers numb around a paper cup of cold coffee, watching her breath cloud the windshield. In the back, her children slept in fragile bundles of blankets and coats, scavenged from thrift stores and donation bins. Emma's stuffed rabbit was clutched to her chest, one ear missing, its fabric worn thin by comfort. Jacob slept curled inward, his small body trembling no matter how tightly Sarah tucked him in. The heater had died weeks ago, another small failure in a long line of collapses she no longer had the energy to count. 6 months earlier, she had believed in schedules, paychecks, and quiet evenings. She had believed effort mattered. Then illness arrived, followed by bills that multiplied faster than prayers, followed by eviction notices printed in calm, merciless ink. Now she watched the fuel gauge hover near empty while the temperature plunged toward numbers that could kill. Her phone buzzed with an emergency alert warning of hypothermia, frostbite, and danger. Sarah turned to look at her children and felt something in her chest split open. This was no longer about pride or legality or doing things right. This was about survival. She turned the wheel away from the lights of town and drove into the dark, guided by nothing but fear, instinct, and a mother's refusal to surrender. The road narrowed until the streetlights vanished entirely, replaced by trees bent low under ice and snow. That was when her headlights caught the stone pillars. They stood half swallowed by ivy, old and imposing, framing a driveway that had nearly vanished beneath years of neglect. No gate, no warning sign, just silence. Sarah slowed, heart pounding, every sensible thought screaming at her to keep driving. Trespassing meant risk. Risk meant police. Police meant questions she could not afford to answer. But the wind slammed against the car, rocking it hard enough to wake Emma, who murmured in her sleep. Sarah swallowed, turned the wheel, and followed the drive as it curved through the trees. The mansion emerged slowly, massive and wounded, its windows dark and broken like blind eyes. Stone walls rose into the storm, scarred by time but unbowed. It looked abandoned, forgotten by the world that once celebrated it. She parked near the crumbling steps and shut off the engine. The silence was sudden and heavy. Snow hissed against the stone as she carried her children toward the house, apologizing under her breath for the choice she was making. Around the back, a broken basement window gaped open beneath dead shrubs. The air inside smelled of dust and age, but it was still air, warm enough. Shelter. Sarah lowered her children through the opening, then followed, scraping her arms and dignity alike. When her feet hit the stone floor, she exhaled shakily. For the first time that night, the wind could not reach them. Inside, the house felt frozen in another century. Dust lay thick on furniture draped in sheets like shrouds, and footsteps echoed too loudly as if the walls were listening. Sarah moved carefully, flashlight cutting narrow paths through darkness. A kitchen revealed rusted stoves and copper pots hanging untouched. When she flipped a switch and the lights flickered on, she laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. Power still ran through the veins of this forgotten place. Upstairs, she found a small bedroom tucked away from the grand halls, its window overlooking the driveway. The mattress was old but intact. Safe. She bundled the children together, fed them crackers from the last of her supplies, and held Jacob until his breathing steadied. Emma whispered that the house felt like a castle. Sarah smiled and let herself pretend. Morning came gray and quiet. Snow had buried the grounds, sealing them in. Over the next days, they lived like ghosts, using water sparingly, lights only when needed. The children played in rooms meant for another life, their laughter echoing where orchestras once had. And slowly Sarah noticed the inconsistencies. Hallways that ended too soon, walls that felt too thick, doors that locked without reason. Drawn by equal parts curiosity and unease, she returned to the basement. Behind an old furnace, her fingers traced a seam in the stone. She pressed. The wall shifted with a sound like a long-held breath finally released. Stairs descended into darkness. Sarah stood frozen, unaware that the choice to step forward would change not just her life, but the fate of history itself. The chamber below felt nothing like the decaying house above. The air was cool and controlled, the silence deliberate. Her flashlight swept across frames, metal, glass. Paintings lined the walls, their colors alive despite decades underground. Sculptures stood frozen mid-motion, perfect and impossible. Jewelry glittered behind glass, stones catching light like trapped stars. Sarah's knees weakened. Even without understanding art, she knew this was no forgotten storage room. This was a vault. At the center, a table held journals and documents arranged with obsessive care. She opened one and read dates that stopped her breath. Names that carried weight. Rockefeller. Page after page detailed acquisitions, shipments, disputes. Words like confiscated, disputed, and sealed appeared again and again. She understood enough to know this collection was built on silence and power, on wealth that erased consequences. Many pieces, she realized, had been stolen, ripped from families during war, sold through shadowed markets, buried to avoid accountability. The man who hid them had known. He had documented his guilt and locked it away. Sarah fled back upstairs shaking, the knowledge heavier than hunger ever was. For days she avoided the chamber, but conscience has a way of knocking louder than fear. She researched at night, cross-referencing titles and images. The truth became undeniable. This was one of the largest hidden caches of stolen art in decades, worth hundreds of millions. Enough money to erase every problem she had. Enough power to destroy her if she chose wrong. The question haunted her. Who did survival belong to? Her children slept safely upstairs, warm for the first time in months, while beneath them lay a fortune built on other families' suffering. When Emma accidentally followed her into the chamber one afternoon, wonder lit her face. "Mama," she whispered, "it's beautiful." Sarah pulled her close and explained as gently as she could that beautiful things can still be wrongfully taken. That treasures carry stories, and some stories are painful. That night, Sarah decided. She documented everything, photographs, notes, records, working while the children slept. She was meticulous, careful, relentless. When she finally reached out to authorities, she told the truth without varnish. She admitted the break-in. The fear, the discovery, the call set everything in motion. Federal agents arrived. Experts confirmed what she feared and hoped. Many pieces were confirmed stolen, others disputed, all priceless. The media descended. Strangers called her brave, others called her foolish. Child services asked questions that kept her awake at night. But then came the returns. An elderly woman wept as a necklace stolen from her grandmother was placed in her hands. A museum received a painting lost since the 1970s. Each reunion stitched something back into the world. Sarah watched from the edges, holding her children, understanding that her role was never to own the treasure, only to open the door that set it free. The consequences were not gentle. There were hearings, interviews, and long hours with lawyers explaining risk in language that never softened. Yet something unexpected followed. Support arrived from places she never imagined. Legal aid stepped in. Housing assistance came through. Donations poured in from people who said her honesty reminded them what integrity looked like. She moved into a modest apartment with creaking floors and working heat. Emma started school again. Jacob's treatments continued without fear of eviction notices. The mansion was sealed and preserved as a crime scene, then a historical site. The hidden chamber became public record, studied and documented, its secrets finally exposed to daylight. Sarah was offered book deals, interviews, even film rights. She declined most of them. Fame had never been the point. One evening, months later, she stood at her kitchen sink watching snow fall outside her new window. The children laughed in the next room, arguing over a board game. Her life was still fragile, still uncertain, but it was honest. She had not become rich from the discovery, but she had become something rarer. She had become proof that desperation does not have to erase morality. That survival does not excuse silence. That one person, even at the edge of losing everything, can choose to restore what power once stole. Years later, Sarah would be invited to speak quietly at museums and universities, not as an expert in art, but as a witness to choice. She never embellished the story. She spoke of fear, hunger, and cold. Of the temptation to take what could solve everything. Of how easy it is to justify wrongdoing when the world has already failed you. She told them the hardest part was not breaking into the mansion, but deciding what kind of mother she wanted her children to remember. Emma once asked if they could have been rich. Sarah answered honestly. "Yes," she said, "but we would have been poor in the ways that last forever." The story followed her children into adulthood, shaping how they saw the world. They learned that history is not distant, that injustice leaves fingerprints, that doing right often costs more in the moment but pays dividends no currency can measure. Sarah never returned to the mansion. She did not need to. The real transformation had never been in stone walls or hidden vaults. It had happened inside a frightened woman who chose responsibility over reward, truth over comfort, and conscience over silence. In the end, Sarah understood something the man who sealed that chamber never had. Wealth can hide wrongdoing, but it cannot erase it. Time can bury truth, but it cannot kill it. What you uncover in darkness will always demand daylight. Her children grew up knowing that survival is not just about staying alive, but about deciding who you are while you do. The world will test you when you are weakest, offering shortcuts wrapped in justification and fear. But character is revealed not in abundance.